Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about an upcoming event in San Diego that you won't want to miss if you're in the vicinity next Friday, March 21st. Talking San Diego will be welcoming Maureen Dowd, the esteemed Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times columnist, for a conversation anchored in her new book, Notorious, which is a compendium of rich, nuanced, in-depth profiles of well-known personalities from acting, music, fashion, big tech, and business. For tickets and more information, visit talkingsandiego.net. Hope to see you there. Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. We are living, there's no getting around it, in Donald Trump's America. The relentless challenges to the constitutional rule of law, the separation of powers, and free expression proliferate by the week. Democrats had a rare opportunity to flex their muscles and force a government shutdown, but Minority Leader Chuck Schumer ultimately decided the costs to both the party and the country outweighed the benefits. He opted to vote to close debate on the resolution to fund the government through September, and effectively guaranteeing the passage of a continuing resolution that Speaker Mike Johnson was able to shepherd in the House with just a single Republican defection. Taking a page straight from the playbook of authoritarian leaders, most notably Hungary's Viktor Orban, Trump continued his full-court press to extend his influence into civil society. He pulled $400 million in funding from Columbia University and is now reviewing the school's eligibility for over $5 billion in federal grants unless it implements a slate of academic changes and cracks down on pro-Palestinian protesters. Meanwhile, the White House continues to bar the Associated Press from access to key events because of its refusal to go along with renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, as Trump insists. And in yet another overreach, Trump cited bogus national security concerns to blackball a second major law firm. A district court delivered a stinging rebuke, one of several rulings this week striking down Trump's recent power grabs. The grim economic numbers and the mounting human costs of Trump's stranglehold over the executive branch have sparked growing, if still largely fragmented, popular opposition. But the sheer breadth of Trump's outrages, coupled with the absolute acquiescence of the Republican Party, raises the fundamental question: can popular opposition, long the last safeguard of democracy, still stop the march toward authoritarianism that Trump has imposed in just 2 months of rule? To break down a week in which Trump, despite a string of losses in the courts, was still able to impose his will on both the legislative process and key sectors of civil society, we welcome 3 of the most thoughtful analysts in the country, all good friends of the podcast. And they are Josh Marshall, a journalist and the founder of Talking Points Memo, which became in 2007 the first digital native publication to win the George Polk Award for legal reporting. He also hosts the Josh Marshall podcast. Josh, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Charlie Sykes, a founder and former editor-at-large of The Bulwark, an MSNBC contributor and the author of 9 books, most recently, How the Right Lost Its Mind. He also has a new Substack newsletter, really excellent and highly recommended, called To the Contrary. Charlie, thanks for joining.
Good to be here.
And Ali Vitali, the new host of MSNBC's Way Too Early, really is, airing weekdays at 5 a.m. God bless you. Previously, Ali covered Capitol Hill for NBC News for nearly a decade. Her first book is Electable: Why America Hasn't Put a Woman in the White House Yet. Great to see you in your new role, and thanks for staying up all the way into the afternoon today.
Absolutely. Afternoon is midnight to me. So this is great.
Well, let's begin with the end of week maneuvers over funding. So, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer suddenly switched gears Thursday and announced he'll now vote for cloture in an effort to avert the government shutdown, which would otherwise come tonight as we tape on Friday. Just one day previous, he claimed the Democrats were united against the bill. Let me just start here, and maybe I can ask you, Charlie, because you wrote on your Substack that as enraging or infuriating as it might feel politically, maybe there's something to it. What precisely is Schumer's fear here, and what is he trying to avoid?
Well, I think what he's trying to avoid is a fight he can't win that has no exit strategy. I understand that Democrats want this fight. They need this fight. They finally have the leverage. There's huge rage out there. But here's the problem with government shutdowns, particularly in the era of Trump. None of us are sure exactly how Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Russ Vought would handle all of this. It might give them vast, sweeping new powers. And then there's the question of what is the end game here? And by the way, I mean the CR is terrible. The choices are atrocious. I think I described it as a poison pill wrapped in a shit sandwich.
That's a continuing resolution that the House Dems want.
Right. I mean, it is terrible on so many levels. But I must say that I'm having flashbacks to. I'm trying to remember when it was. 2011 or so, when Rush Limbaugh and Ted Cruz were demagoguing a shutdown of the government because they figured that was the way they were going to stop Obamacare. And there were rational voices saying, you're never going to win this. What's the point? What's the exit strategy? What is the scenario that you get to? And I feel the same kind of emotion that people feel that they want to fight, they want to do something. But right now, shutting down the government that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are trying to dismantle seems to be counterproductive. So we'll see how this plays out.
All right. Well, so it seems like there's both political fears that the Dems this time would get blamed for it, but also I'm not sure I fully understand it. And as you know, maybe you would ask me, the lawyer, but there's worry about what they could do. But in the absence of if the government shuts down, is there tangible reason to think that Musk and Trump can just run amok?
That's the catch-22, right? Like in my conversations all week, it's been the same circular pattern of thinking because everyone agrees it's bad no matter which way Democrats go on this. And it's because if you shut down the government, you're giving Republicans what they want because they're already trying to not spend the money that Congress appropriates. And the president really is in the driver's seat, deciding which parts of government need to maintain at least marginal functionability and not. But then if you don't shut down the government, they're also promising, and this is how they got the House Freedom Caucus on board on the House side, is they were telling them, we're going to do rescissions and we're going to do impoundment regardless. So they're saying the quiet part out loud. And it's the reason why Democrats both were not bought into the process, not brought in on negotiations, but also because they know that no matter what they choose, they're still going to get the bad result that has their base so furious at them. It means that this whole thing is a catch-22. It's just not fertile soil for them to fight on. But then I think the politics conversation and the strategy conversation that my sources have been having with me is that the House Democrats viewed this as fundamentally different than Senate Democrats, and they went in with a true strategy to be fully united. They only lost one Democrat on this vote, and they viewed it as a continuing resolution versus negotiating leverage going forward, drawing a line on what they would and wouldn't stand for. Senate Democrats, A, didn't seem to think it was going to pass the House, and so they were caught flat-footed when it did. But then B, the way that Schumer handled this, showing that he was willing to fight, giving in to what some of the grassroots has been agitating for and what House Democrats were pushing for, but then 36 hours later, reversing course, saying he would vote on cloture. And I think for people, even if you put that decision aside, people are like, well, what did we get for that? It just seems strategically very inept.
I think
A lot of what both of you said is very accurate. There's one small point that has come up a lot in this debate, and that is the idea that existing laws and regulations open up new legal opportunities to fire people as you go into the shutdown, especially after 30 days. I've actually been talking to some legal sources that, obviously, federal civil service law is a very niche area of law, right? And from what I understand, that basic premise that the law and regulations themselves give new legal opportunities is just false and based on just a basic misunderstanding of the laws as they exist. Basically, the difference between a policy intentional furloughing of employees and what happens in that set of circumstances and what happens in a shutdown furlough. And they're just different. And there are a lot of arguably extra legal momentum that this could create. But this issue of the law itself has come up a lot. And I think it's sort of an example of, again, the lack of preparation you were talking about, that the people making the decisions seem to have basic misunderstandings about even federal law as it exists. And quite apart from the decision that Schumer has made here, I think you're 100% right. And this is what I was picking up in a lot of my reporting. I've lost track of what is 36 hours or 14 hours ago. But, when kind of everything was sort of hitting the fan, that there was just a sense, we're totally unprepared. You're probably right, but we are just not ready. And it sucks that we're not ready, but we're not ready. And that's at Chuck Schumer's doorstep.
But I think they were really betting on the fact that 20 to 30 members on the House Freedom Caucus side had never voted for a CR before. And they were banking that people like Chip Roy would hold firm.
That's my point. They didn't think Mike Johnson would be able to get it together.
Correct.
But again, we saw what happened in January with the speaker vote, right? I mean, we've seen this a couple times with Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson plus Donald Trump behind him, basically saying how it's going to be. This has happened a few times. So that was a bad assumption. And I would say that even setting aside assumptions, I would say a good week ago, there was plenty of signals like they've got this.
Yeah. They met with the Freedom Caucus 2 weeks ago at the White House.
Yeah. So that was a negligence, incompetence part of this. I mean, look, obviously, I have various ideas about how the Democrats might approach this. I guess we're going to find out in the background now exactly what happens.
I'm watching.
Yeah, as we speak, Ali's looking at, waiting for the smoke signals to go up from the Capitol. Right.
I'm like Pavlovian every time I hear a noise.
Exactly. The basic point is they're already doing everything. They're not really under any constraints right now. That's first of all. Will they have less constraints? Well, you can't have less constraints than no constraints. But I think people also have to remember public opinion remains really the central constraint here. That you do something dramatic and people start to freak out. We've already seen some examples of that where they do something and then pull back. My sense that the best argument for Democrats to do this is to use it as an opportunity to focus the entire national attention on what is happening to basic government services, what is in the process of happening right now, to take it to a fairly big political story, to a central national news story, to speed that up. And it may be that they themselves get bruised a lot in the process of speeding that up, but we're a year and a half from a national election. I think that for Democrats, there is a big thing to be gotten just by saying, all right, we're going to talk for a week now about gutting the Social Security Administration and gutting the VA hospital system. And we, as Democrats, think even if we get roughed up, that is going to push this further into the center of the public mind, and that's worth it. Because we're kind of on this, my thought on this generally for Democrats is that I think it's basically baked in that the Republicans are going to get wrecked in the 2026 midterms. I don't think there's much question about that. But by the time that happens, the federal government will be unrecognizable. So I think that they have a lot of need to do everything they can to at least slow down this process, because 2026 is a long ways away.
I think you're right, Josh. I mean, so many of these things we haven't confronted before. And I think there's actual fear within the caucus. Well, who knows what they can do? But very basically, the ability to mess with allotted funds increases in a shutdown, but the whole panoply of individual rights, which are vested in federal employees and which a judge just yesterday enjoined the administration, said, go back and do it right, give the notice opportunity. Those are not rights as I understand them either. Again, it hasn't come up and everyone's jittery about what could happen and whether they'll ignore it anyway, either blatantly or in a sort of the dog ate my homework way. But in theory, those really should hold. And to the extent that was the assumption, I think it does speak to maybe lack of preparation, maybe just jitters now, because there have been so many ways where things have been pushed and it's hard pressed to rely on the rules, as it were.
Yeah, and I mean, to this question of lack of preparation, look, I mean, it continues to be stunning that Democrats were taken by surprise in January, since the Trump folks had signaled this. They actually had a written plan in which everybody had seen, and yet they did seem so flat-footed about it. They did seem unprepared. And I think there has been a failure of imagination. And I guess this is the argument against the shutdown, is that it introduces all kinds of unknown unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen here. It is unpredictable. And I think that in terms of how creative are, Trump and Musk and Vogt going to be in using this, we don't know, because we've never had a shutdown like this with people like this who are this reckless. I agree with Josh that they need to focus on the dismantling of, say, Social Security or what they're doing to the veterans. I think they can do this anyway. Look, I think Schumer has been grossly mismatched to the job and to the responsibilities here. I'm not defending him, but he makes the point that, when your opponent is in the process of dismantling himself, you don't interrupt him. Right now, Trump owns the chaos of government. He owns the chaos of the markets. This changes the subject to do this. He is dismantling the government. You can highlight the dismantling of the government without actually yourself shutting down the government. There's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there. Republicans and conservatives love shutdowns because they don't like government. They love to make the point that, look, we don't need all of this government. That runs counter to the Democratic message here. But again, I think that, in terms of the jitters, some of the jitters are legitimate, because you don't know what these guys are capable of or what they will do or the damage that they would do during the 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, 2 months of a shutdown that would be irreparable even after the midterm elections. So I think there is a lack of preparation, and there's been a lack of imagination about what these guys are capable of doing.
But there's also the reality that most Democrats I spoke to said, even if they supported fighting on this, there was a real fear of, okay, if we shut down, how do we get out? And there was no clear path out of a shutdown. And I think that's the thing that freaked people out the most. I mean, even just sitting here, like, Josh made a better case for what Democrats in the Senate entertained doing and what House Democrats were pushing for than any elected Democrat that I have spoken to. And
there's a pattern there.
I agree. And on the creativity piece, right? You talk about the creativity within the Trump administration, but on my show this morning, I had a former Harry Reid staffer on, Democratic strategist on my show, making the point that in this generation of iPhones, you need a non-flip phone strategy for being creative, getting into the ecosystem and pushing back. And it's quite apt. And I think that is something that has stuck with me and will stick with me as we look at what the long tail of this is within the Democratic path forward.
It sounds to me as if Schumer's having been completely flat-footed and pulling out the rug from under many in his caucus. I mean, it just seems like a bad moment for him that makes the Dems look even weaker and less having their shit together.
While we were sitting here, he told the Washington Post, this is a direct quote, "We'd hoped Johnson couldn't get the votes."
Wow.
Yeah, no shit.
Okay.
I think they're making a mistake. I think they should block cloture, and I think they should force this confrontation, just to make my own position clear on that.
You've talked a lot about how unprecedented all this is and how many unknowns for the Dems. Leaving aside the kind of political D versus R feel, I mean, does the fact that the country and the Dems have been maneuvered to this precipice, does it make you concerned for the health of the democracy?
I think the whole structure of the republic is really in question right now. That whole discourse before the election of, look, we're going to lose our democracy. Well, there's no doctor calling it, right? You lose it in stages. And what the president is pretty openly trying to do is, what they used to have in the British parliamentary system. You rule without parliament, and that's kind of it. And as long as you can come up with your own supply of money, that's how it goes. And that is functionally what Trump is doing right now. And while he's doing that, you have a number of moves that are not precisely illegal, but are uses of state power that are, by anybody's reckoning, wholly unprecedented and outside of any understanding of what is the proper use of executive power. Sort of what they're, I don't know if you guys saw this, a memo they sent to Columbia University, basically trying to run the internal disciplinary process and what departments can exist and stuff like this. Now, is that against the law? Well, not exactly. The government issues grants and all this kind of stuff. There's some complexity, but that's what we know from Hungary, if not from Russia or even kind of 1970s Chile kind of things. So it's the whole structure of the republic and existence in a substantive sense of the republic is, I think, very much in question right now.
Well, I agree with this completely. And by the way, yeah, the talk about democracy sort of missed the point of the entire constitutional order right now. And I think the founders would have been astounded by what's been happening over the last couple of weeks, because they wrote the powers of Congress into Article 1. They thought that Congress was supposed to be supreme. And what they never imagined would be that a co-equal branch of government would, without a fight, give up its power. They assumed that there would be a certain jealousy, a defense of its power. And one of the worst parts of this continuing resolution is just the abject surrender of Congress of any say over massive tax increases and tariffs. This is something that, and again, this is almost all voluntary, that Congress troops in and votes to make itself into potted plants. And that is extraordinary, and James Madison would be amazed to watch this. So yes, a lot of these things are crumbling, and the judiciary is hanging out there, but the assault on the legal system, the assault on other norms, continues apace. We could devote hours and hours and hours to the institutions of civil society as well as the institutions of government that are right now under siege.
Quick point about tariffs, and I think this is, I know you know this, Charlie, but I'm not sure everybody gets this, that people kind of assume that tariffs are kind of like the pardon power and being commander in chief. It's not. The president has no inherent authority over tariffs at all. That is, kind of this huge delegation that Congress did on that old assumption that presidents would be halfway sane. And the idea that you wouldn't try to kind of, pull back the reins a little bit is in itself kind of nuts. The idea that you would loosen the reins under this, because it really is the case, like there's literally no one in this country who's hot to put big tariffs on other countries right now. It's just this one dude. It's not even a right or left thing. No one is thinking about this except for this one guy. It's unreal.
One quick to add on tariffs, if you want a link between tariffs and the CR, lawmakers were telling me about this tiny little provision that they noticed as it went through the Rules Committee, where in that package, it effectively prohibits anyone from bringing a vote to revoke the emergency power that Trump used to put those tariffs in place in the first place. A lot of stuff swirling around, but there's the link between your tariffs and your CR. And because there's so much other stuff, it's very much flown under the radar.
Who votes to give up that power? That's what's amazing about it.
Right. But, and I know we talk about elections only being 18 months away, but that's all Republicans and really anyone who votes for this continuing resolution basically saying, I'm okay with the tariffs too. So then electorally, you got a problem there as well.
Actually, the answer to your question, Josh, I do think there's the same problem with what he's trying to do with Colombia as the general theme that Charlie just surfaced, which is this ain't your job. That money has come from and is subject to all kinds of programs that Congress has set up. But I wanted to move away from the strictly political and legal just to the influence that he is, nevertheless, vast influence, it seems to me, that he's attempting and in some cases succeeding in exercising over civil society. So we have the legal industry, big legacy media, the academy, all of whom it seems have this kind of structure of get a whipping child, whip them, and then everyone is now cowed and they're looking at sort of protecting their own turf, which has been upended in ways they couldn't have imagined.
What I think a lot in terms of is the penumbra of fear that these actions project. And I have seen it in a number of ways just in the last few days. But I was talking to someone who works at a regional bank, big bank, but regional bank. And they were getting rid of their, fairly anodyne corporate DEI policy and their internal rationale. And as I understood it, this was not like they wanted to do it and they were just kind of hanging their hat on this. They were worried. They were worried that their FDIC insurance would be interpreted as they are a federal contractor. Okay. Now, I don't think by pre-2025 legal analysis that makes a lot of sense. But when you see wow, that one guy just got arrested and he's down in Louisiana right now, you internalize the understanding of okay, I don't know what the range of possible is here. And everybody starts thinking oh, okay, we're under a different set of rules. So even under things that have nothing to do with speech per se or immigration per se, you start seeing wow, I'm not sure the register or the criteria of what's possible and what is not applies anymore. And everybody starts keeping their head down. And that's a big deal.
Look, Jelani Cobb, he's the head of the Journalism School of Columbia. He said to people, basically, I don't think we can protect you, Columbia. I mean, that was stunning, right? And you maybe should think about whether you show up at demonstrations or not. So I think the word of the day, in fact, although who knows what Charlie will come up with in the next half hour, is penumbra. That is really the phenomenon that in all these different industries struck me, how in the legal industry, say this, it's an outrageous order. Judge Ludig just called it a full frontal assault on the legal system, the one against Perkins Coie. But I'll tell you what, I know personally, my parallel of your story with the bank person, Josh, is law firm partners thinking timidly but rationally, are big companies going to want to retain us if they think that, the administration has hostility, whether or not it happens? So in ways that I think even when we were worried before the election, that at least I didn't fully absorb.
No.
This is the playbook, as I understand it, by the way, from Kim Shepley and other of Hungary. Exactly. You've got a small stratum that are, just completely made victims, and then you have a whole bunch of people living their lives with heads down, but really important sectors of civil society that you would expect to be pushing back just cowed.
Well, and that was the big shock, I think, early on when we saw the billionaires bending the knee, because I think there had been an assumption that, massive wealth, massive power in the private sector would protect you against that. In fact, it turned out to be the opposite, is the more you had, the more you were afraid you were going to lose, and the more entangled you were with government power and government regulation. There is that old, very popular expression among conservatives, old-fashioned conservatives, which is that a government that was big enough to do everything for you was also so powerful that it could do anything to you. And I think we're kind of learning that. But I suppose if there's one sliver of good news, though, it was the response of these big law firms to the attempt to intimidate them. The fact that all the partners stepped up, the way they forcefully pushed back against the administration and got judicial relief. Perkins Coie did not roll over. They got another large law firm to represent them. The partners all put their names on the brief. Had they caved in, I think you would have had the domino effect of it's not just dangerous to oppose the administration, but now it's going to be difficult for you to be able to fight back if the entire legal profession, because we keep now looking to the judiciary, but if the lawyers are afraid, and you can sort of see what the strategy is. If there was an authoritarian playbook, it would be, how do you intimidate all of these sectors? Well, you go after these targets, and you create that penumbra of fear. And that's been what's happening. And quite frankly, I think all of us had very dark views of what this administration might mean. And yet it's far darker in reality than even we thought, or at least I thought back in October and November. And I was pretty dark.
I come with one anecdote about the chilling effect, and then I wonder if I could ask you a question, Harry. My anecdote is just the parlor game in Washington, and the large part of why we're seeing Republican consulting firms have a boom in business is because many businesses are asking them the same question: how do I stay off Trump's radar? And so that is yet another reminder, an example of the way that folks are trying to navigate in this space where he's touching everything from the stock market on a downward trajectory, in large part because of tariffs and other economic moves, but then also the way that he's going after law firms, going after diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, more and more in that vein. And so people are trying to keep their heads down in the corporate world as well. But the question that I would ask you too is the way that the administration is arguing that there's some kind of foreign national security threat from Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia graduate student. That's what they're arguing. And then, of course, his lawyer and many others, including Ann Coulter, are saying, isn't this a protection from the First Amendment? If the courts were to rule in favor of the way the government sees this, what's the precedent that sets? And then what's the outgrowth of that?
Man, you're good. And, maybe if you have extra time before 5 a.m., you could go to law school part-time, because it's a really important
I
point.
considered that. I went to cover the Trump campaign instead.
Power to Williams and Connolly. I'll get back to them in a moment. But there are a couple risks here. And exactly what they're doing with him and threatening now to do with the Alien Act of 1798 is the same. To play a card that simply says national security and have it be unreviewable. The argument that was made, and you're right, Judge Howell, she came out, she'd already written her opinion, she clobbered them. This order sends chills down my spine. But when they appeal, they're going to say what their guy said before, which is Donald Trump found, everyone knows it's bullshit, but Donald Trump found that Perkins Coie presents a national security risk because of their dishonest information and the steal. It's ridiculous, but you may not review that court. And that is the kind of argument that, when I stay up late and can't sleep, I think I can see 4 members of the Supreme Court, for starters, endorsing. But that's their ultimate card, including in the immigration area, that at the end of the day, there are ways that we can do things without review. And there are certain both statutes, the CIA, and a few cases that sort of endorse that. The courts, I don't want to give too big a detour of it, but basically the Supreme Court pushed back in the Guantanamo cases. No, you can't have unreviewable authority, but that is the argument that they are going to make. And then I just want to say, yes, power to Williams and Connolly, and you're really right, Charlie. Normally you wouldn't see 14 signatures. It was the partners' way of saying, and Perkins Coie fought. But even if they win, even if this holds up, I'm here to tell you that, they were stuck. They made their best of a bad situation. This is exactly actually what's happening now. There's, push and pull whether certain sectors of the legal industry will come out in favor and echo the view that Judge Ludick had, that this is a full frontal assault on the legal system. And clients are a conservative bunch, and lawyers are a conservative bunch. So even in a world in which Perkins Coie's rights are absolutely vindicated, even so, you're the Fortune 50 company and you want to know on the big case whether you go with Perkins Coie, who we know that are on Trump's shit list, right? This is sort of, as you were just saying, the ways in which the influence can happen even if he gets defeated in the courts. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate, brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we uncork the notion of drinking bottled wine versus canned wine. Yeah, wine in a can. Wine connoisseurs may stay true to the bottle, but wine connoisseurs have adopted the untraditional packaging for its added convenience, ideal for picnics, concerts, and outdoor events, really anywhere corkscrews are scarce. And since aluminum cools faster than glass, it reduces the time it takes to chill your favorite Sauvignon Blanc. But swirling your wine in a glass does help it open up, which gives it a lot more flavor. Of course, you can always transfer your canned wine to a glass, but if you're looking to experience the subtleties of a nice bottle, drinking from a glass adds a lot. There are wines more suited to the bottle, and there are those well suited for the canned life. Crisp and sparkling whites and rosés in particular tend to fare best in cans, but bigger, bolder wines will usually benefit from a nice glass. It would seem both have their place. Still on the fence between bottles or cans? There's always wine in a box.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's A Spirited Debate. What about media, right? We still have this ridiculous AP suit where they've been excluded because they don't say Gulf of America. You know, this has been the story of the Washington Post and the LA Times, that the big money, which we thought might be insulating, has instead been making them trigger shy. Do you have a sense of the whole play within big media, which obviously has its own, issues to be dealing with anyway?
Yeah, look, far be it for me to ever speak on behalf of big media. And then Josh, please pick up this mantle. But we know what this administration does. And Trump himself, as a private citizen, was always very litigious. And so the fact that now he is continuing a crusade to try to chip away at the ability of media to have access, have a free press, I do think that's a feature, not a bug, and it has been for a long time. I think, again, what I always come back to in this environment is that we're just journalists and we're just here to do our jobs. We're here to ask good questions. We're here to get an understanding. We're here to tell people what's going on. And look, the way the White House has taken control of the White House press pool, it seems like very inside baseball, I think, to most Americans. But I think the only message we can continue to hammer home is the White House should not be choosing who gets to cover it based on good or bad behavior that they decide and perceive. And that's never been the way that White Houses have operated. And in the past, when White Houses have threatened to do this sort of thing, all the networks have stood together. And that's what you're seeing now. It's just that this White House isn't cowed by it and doesn't seem to care.
I think the big lesson is you cannot really have an independent news organization that is owned by a diversified corporation.
Oh, my God, yeah.
I don't speak up a lot for the New York Times, but there is a reason why the Times does not come up in these stories. And that is because the ownership of the Times is just the Times. They don't have other things where they say, look, the media business we have is already marginal at best. We're not going to make our other profitable businesses endangered because of the trouble the media business gets us into. So, we obviously, I think, because we think it's true and it is true, in a lot of our propaganda for our organization, we stress that we are totally independent, right? We don't have some outside owner who does, kind of far away, who's going to change the deal with us and all that kind of stuff. But it's not even just a matter of scale and that kind of independence. Again, there's this issue of a news organization that is owned by a big diversified corporation can simply not be very independent under these circumstances. That's the reality. ABC News, is taking flack for Disney World and Epcot, whatever all those things they have down in Florida are, right? And that's a basic thing in a complex regulatory state. That's just the reality.
And Paramount wants to have a gazillion dollar merger. And,
right.
Yeah.
And that's scarier. I have to say the CBS case is the one that kind of keeps me up, because that case has no merit whatsoever. And if they settle it, it basically is like, it doesn't matter. You're going to have these corporate entities who will pay out millions of dollars on something completely bogus, which then gets to another threat that, yes, we have a problem with these diversified corporations, but also as we have the decentralization of the media, we also have to realize that they are also more vulnerable to a new climate of litigiousness. And so This is crucial because, they're coming for Times versus Sullivan. And I don't know, how many votes on the Supreme Court there are to do that. But this is something that Donald Trump has talked about. This is something that Clarence Thomas has talked about, removing many of the shield. Now, we have all of these journalists, and I'm one of them, on Substack, independent journalists out there, who no longer have the umbrella that the big corporations have to deal with a libel suit. And this doesn't mean that you will lose the libel suit. It means that you lose when you are sued. How many people have a $500,000 sitting around to pay your legal bills? So there is, in terms of this penumbra of fear and intimidation out there, it doesn't necessarily have to be just from government power, although I do think it's crucial to recognize what is new here, is that Trump is using both government power and the threat of litigation for a pincer move on the media. And that is terrifying. And if it's terrifying to CBS and ABC, imagine what it means to the rest of us, that you have an FCC or government that might punish you at the same time that you may face a totally frivolous but very, very costly libel or defamation lawsuit. We could be in for some very, very difficult times for the media. And again, going back to the playbook, the way it works in Hungary, you don't necessarily have to have somebody who pounds on your door at midnight when people go, it's just not worth it putting my head up. It's just not worth it taking on the government. And that's very conceivable now.
Look, I think that's right. And the rest of us is the issue. I, like you, am now in a sort of independent channel, but I've got a new insurance policy just for the cost of of what would be a meritless lawsuit. I want to make one other point that's new, which is he's not only doing this as an abuse of executive power, he's doing here precisely what he got impeached for. The lawsuit against CBS was Trump versus CBS as candidate. He didn't like what they did with Kamala Harris. That's him. And at the time, it was ridiculed by everyone. We also have seen this in other instances in the media where, so it's this extra element of also using executive power that for completely, personal purposes that makes it so vast and dangerous. Okay, look, it seems to me it's all happened very quickly. But as you assess the whole landscape, at least you think about what's left. Do we begin to think about, when we think about Hungary and others, can there be effective popular opposition in the country? Is there a real scenario in which people's taking to the streets has political force and pushback? Is that really, right now, something that we should be contemplating?
I mean, look, we're already seeing lots of popular opposition. You see, Republican members of Congress, you see it in these town halls. You see it showing up in the polls. You see it all over the place. So I think it's there, and I think it's growing. And I have always thought that this is not fundamentally going to be a question decided in the courts. This is a battle over public opinion. And I have a lot of confidence that public opinion will have out. And so that's really what it is. That's really what it is about. Now, you can have a whole lot of damage along the way. But again, back to your initial question, this is why I thought it made sense for the Democrats to take this path, because I think it is one of the few opportunities they have to accelerate the maturation of public opinion on this issue. Now, whether or not that particular is right or not, again, this is fundamentally about public opinion, and I think we see from all sorts of angles the American public does not support what they're seeing. Now, obviously, to really get the government to back off, you've got to have a lot of opposition, not just, 55, 45. You need majorities of people. So I think that is going to happen. And frankly, I don't think, except in very extreme circumstances, it's not big visible protests of people marching in the street that changes things. That's just not our framework, I don't think. But other things can have a lot of effect.
Is your thought that there's pockets of concerted opposition, and that kind of makes his hammerlock on Republicans weaken, and then it's sort of soft stuff? Or do you think he is, in fact, Trump, attuned enough to public opinion that real protests will make him back away from the Hungarian path?
I think that Donald Trump sees street protests as an opportunity to flex his muscle and to say those people out there. I think that, and I agree with Josh, public opinion will change because of stories, because of people having conversations, not because they see mass demonstrations. I mean, there may be a place for mass demonstrations, but there's also a risk with that things get out of hand. That Donald Trump is fully prepared to weaponize that, and there's no one who's going to be standing around the Oval Office telling him that he cannot do that, he can't invoke the Insurrection Act. But I do sense that, and I'm always asking this question because, I live in a swing state and talk to people who've gone, who are purple voters, and what is persuasive to them, what changes their mind. And a lot of the conversations we're having now are not conversations that we even had in 2020 or 2024. These are different conversations. Elon Musk is a different conversation. What's happening with the chaos and with the economy and the tariffs and all of these things. And we tend to focus a lot on what's going on, the chaos in Washington, but these stories are trickling down to every state and every community, and people know people who, lost their jobs in the forestry department or can't get a call, answered from Social Security. And these stories are showing up in local media, and it's very, very, very early. But the downstream effects, I think, are going to be very, very dramatic. And the fact that you have Elon Musk who's driving it, does Elon Musk know the damage he's doing? No. Does he give a shit? No, he does not. So he does not know what the consequences are, and he doesn't really care about it. And yet the Republican Party right now is joined at the hip with him in all of his recklessness. And, what could possibly go wrong? An awful lot. So I guess I'm in the camp of saying that right now is a narrative and a trajectory, and it's going to pick up momentum. Do not interrupt it or change the subject. But Josh's point that this might have a shutdown might have accelerated this is interesting. We just don't know. Democrats may have been able to say, look, you don't like the way it feels when the government is shut down. This is what Trump and Musk are doing, and you are now seeing the consequences of not having a government. Who knows?
That connective sinew is so central to the Democratic strategy right now, but it leads me to think about the media landscape and how splintered it is, and how if you abide by Josh's thinking, which again, he's made the case better for a shutdown than any Democrat who wants a shutdown, or not wants a shutdown, but sees why it would be the best of very bad decisions. At least in that circumstance, media organizations that sometimes don't always talk about the central news of the day would inevitably end up covering a shutdown because that's just what would be forced to happen. And so that is, I think, one of the challenges for Democrats, is making sure that in a completely splintered media environment, these stories are still getting out there, the stories of local pain. And that's why you're starting to see them also go to redder districts. I mean, this is a play that Ro Khanna and Maxwell Frost and Robert Garcia and all of these folks, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, going to be out there over the weekend. They're basically saying if Republicans cede this space to them, they will take it. But I know what a fan you are, Harry, of Taylor Swift, so I'll borrow a phrase from her. It's going to be death by a thousand cuts here. This is not going to be one singular thing. And I'll bring it back to the proof point that we saw from 2021, which is we thought that January 6th was such a singular moment, changing the way that people thought about Trump, thought about what he was capable of, willing to do, sustain within his government. And it actually didn't really change many minds at all. And to the extent that minds were changed, and I met these people during the Republican primary, I met Trump voters in New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina who said I was with him until then. So it's not that they didn't change their minds. It's just that it wasn't permanent. And so I think when we think about, is there going to be one singular event? I actually don't think it is. And I think the more that people see it in their friends and neighbors is the way that you actually have people come to a different sense on everything from tariffs because their friend who owns the whiskey store down the street or the distillery down the street in Kentucky has to close their doors, everything to, a friend or a family member who is a federal, well, don't get me started on the wine, but I think that the broad range here, the connectivity is when people see it in the people that they love.
No, look, it's a great point. The anecdotes they seem to redouble and they're gonna be more and more powerful. What I'm wondering, and I think we just don't know, is do they play out in a normal political process where there's just a pushback, or does some more extraordinary event have to take place, almost cataclysmic on the part of the people?
One, I know this is on your radar screen, but one early indicator will be here in Wisconsin. We have a state Supreme Court election coming up on April 1st. I mean, this is Wisconsin, and the last report that I saw from WisPolitics said $59 million has been spent so far. The last judicial race in Wisconsin was the most expensive in American history. This one tops it. But to spend $59 million on one seat on the state Supreme Court is an indication Elon Musk has become central to it. He's become an issue. In many ways, this is going to be a referendum on Elon Musk. The conservative candidate is running, basically saying, elect me so that I can support Donald Trump's agenda. So it will be a very interesting indicator of how this is all playing out.
Great point, and months of conversation we hope to come on it. All right, Talking Five, we just have a minute left. This week's question, it seemed like the White House lawn was repurposed for a couple hours last week as a Tesla showroom. What's the next privatization of the White House lawn that we can expect?
Trump wine and steaks.
eBay.
One word.
One word.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
You almost can't make this up. I would say maybe an auction to find a replacement for Marco Rubio's testicles.
Ooh, you would have to look very hard. Okay, I'm going with executive branch furniture, 50% off. Thank you so much, Josh, Charlie, and Ali. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Check us out on Substack at Talking Fed Substack, where I'm posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week breaking down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so it's your support that funds all of our franchises. And Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this new media venture committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Though rest assured, we're still the same scrappy, independent podcast you've come to know and trust, just now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McArdle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadranathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. And production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.